Hello, everybody. This is another week in which we have come to try to bring some knowledge upon you. My name is Mike, and this is the Understanding Room. Um, as always, I have my homie from the RGV on the other side. Oh, they say what's up to the people.
Good evening, guys. Thank you once again, as always, for joining us. We're here. We're wanting to give you all the knowledge we can impart, and hopefully, y'all can join us in the conversation.
And I, like I said before, I did start an Understanding Room Twitter page. I will get better at trying to keep that up to date and put in more notifications on there. Eventually, I want to get to the point where we can answer some of your asks, answer some of your questions that you post on there, and that way we can keep a open dialogue with everyone that's watching and subscribing to us. Um, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into it. I know you guys are used to Odie doing the history, but I thought I'd give him a break this week and jump into do the history myself because I am also a fan of history. And what I found this week was pretty interesting. Um, that since the Civil War ended in 1865, there have been one, two, four, five, six, seven civil rights acts that have been um, sent and spent through Congress. Um, and just to show like everything that me and Odie been talking about over the past 10 weeks have been how everything seems to be bandaged up or covered up or just had some sort of, like tied in a pretty bow and saying that it's all better. Um, when we all know that's not the case. So um, I went through and saw all the different civil rights acts throughout history since the ending of the Civil War. And while I was doing that, I went through and read most of the Constitution. And there were some things that I noticed in the writing of the Constitution that I'll get into a little bit later on. Um, but the first Civil Rights Act was the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was the first United States federal law to define citizenship and affirm that all citizens are equally protected by the law. It was mainly intended in the wake of the American Civil War to protect the civil rights of persons of African descent born in or about the United States. And it was enacted April 9th, 1866, which is a full year after the Civil War ended. So much like today, I'm pretty sure Congress had the back and forth of why this should pass, why this shouldn't pass, which is in itself kind of disturbing because here we are going through it again. We're having um, senators still debating about voting and voting rights and voting restrictions and all this other stuff when there are other more pressing things that can be um, talked about, debated about. But this is where they would rather spend their time. So here we are, we're still trying to get all this stuff passed, and senators are still just talking about the same old stuff. So it's kind of like I said, this is why history is important because it's gonna repeat itself if you don't pay attention to it. Um, then the next Civil Rights Act after that came in 1875. It's sometimes called the Enforcement Act or the Force Act. It was the United States federal law enacted during the Reconstruction era in response to civil rights violations against African Americans. So we're not even we're like 10 years after the first Civil Rights Act was enacted that they had to make another one to enforce the first Civil Rights Act against discrimination and violence and unfair treatment of African Americans. Just 10 years after the Civil War was. I mean, this is a whole decade after the Civil War had already been decided. It was over. We're entering that phase of Reconstruction where I've said before, Abraham Lincoln had no plans for African Americans. He was really hoping that they would use their freedom to go back home to Africa. But you have to understand, after 400 years of your culture being diluted, of your, any knowledge of where you're from, or even knowing if you are with your original family, because we all know that they've been stripped and moved and taken away from their families. So how do you expect them to just up and go back to a land that they don't know, and through several generations have never even heard about? Um, and it's it just goes to show you how history has its way of putting in its own way of altering reality, um, and it still goes on today. Um, After that Civil Rights Act, which was enacted on March 1st, 1875, came the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So pretty good, you know, pretty good chunk of history, where the next Civil Rights Act came in. But we all know that in between that time, there was still unfair treatment. There were still disparities going on in different neighborhoods, and especially toward African Americans. They get to the point now where the First World War is over. We're moving in, and the Second World War is over, and African Americans are wanting equality. This is where we're starting to say, hey, you know, this separate but equal thing isn't working because we're separated, but we're not being treated equally. So we need to find a way to overcome um, this whole rhetoric of how this is supposed to work. So the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was legislation passed to the Commission on Civil Rights to investigate civil rights violations, also established a Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice. So up until 1957, there was not any sort of representation for the hate crimes, the unfair treatment, the unfair killings of African Americans. There was no one to represent them in the Department of Justice at all since the ending of slavery. Um, so this Civil Rights Act here in 1957 put an end to that. They decided at that point, we're going to try to make some legislation um, to enforce this. So then after that Civil Rights Act became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits the discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in hiring, firing, or promoting. Um, Going to the workplace. This is the time now where we're talking about everyone wanting to have their equality within the workplace, women included. They already had the women's suffrage movement. They are going through the time now where everyone is asking for their fair share, and the people at the top need to start distributing equally. Um, so then after that came a year later, the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And it outlawed the discriminatory voting practices adopted in many southern states after the Civil War, including literacy tests as a prerequisite to voting. This right here is the first um, piece of legislation that was passed in order to give African Americans the right to vote without having to jump through hurdles, jump through hoops, um, and have their voices heard too in a democratic political process. Um, and you know, it 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 says in the act itself that it's been discriminatory practices since the Civil War. I would dare to say they went prior to that, because these people who were supposedly freed after the Civil War didn't have the rights. But what about their rights to vote and have their voices heard prior to that? So even still, they were still left unheard. They were still left silent because during the the fight against the Great Britain when America wanted their freedom. Could have been some time where somebody could have sat down and said, you know what, this is a time where if we're asking for our freedom, why shouldn't we give freedom to these humans, that people that we have out here working in the servitude of us in order to, build our economy, and we consider them property. It wasn't thought of then. So um, it's a whole round around and around the thing goes. It's one of those things where everyone tries to justify what's going on with um, some sort of you know some sort of excuse, like trying to cover and veil everything, and it's just continuously happening. Like I said, they put everything in a pretty little bow, and they try to say that everything's all pretty, everything's all sunshine and rainbows, but while behind the scenes they're still making laws that prohibit things like equal treatment for voting, and getting certain needs and services for your community. um, then the Civil Rights Act of 1968. It was an expansion of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, properly known as the Fair Housing Act, prohibits discrimination concerning the sale, rental, financing of housing based off race, religion, national origin, and sex. And this is a lot what Odie was talking about last week. Um, the differences in how banks were willing to lend to those who were white than they were to those who were black. Like Odie said, the definition of credit is, you know, their trustworthy, your trustworthiness into paying back a debt, and they will look at someone who was an African American and look at them and be like, I don't trust that you would make this payment back to the bank. So we're gonna deny you, even though you have the income, even if you have, everything that you need, we're gonna deny it because we simply don't think that you are trustworthy. And this has been something that's been ingrained into the system still as of today. But this is again something we'll talk about later on. So the final Civil Rights Act came within my lifetime. Um, I was born in 1986, and this Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1991. It is the U.S. labor law passed in response to the United States Supreme Court decision that limited the rights of employees who had sued their employers for discrimination. President Bush had used his veto against the more comprehensive Civil Rights Act of 1990. So you were talking about, again, like we were talking about in the Civil Rights Act of, I think it was 57, when they were talking about workplace. It should have been in 64. It was 64. When we were talking about having disparages in promoting, hiring, and firing, we're still in it was in 1991 that they had to enforce that, due to the number of lawsuits that were being handed out to employers who were outright refusing to promote people, or for firing people and refusing to hire people based off of the color of their skin, basically. We've all heard about the stories of African Americans who put in the application and then they never hear anything back, and finding out later that it's because your name sounds like you're of African American descent. So, 1991. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. If you look at the grand scheme of things, I mean, like I said, within my lifetime, that this happened.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mike. Sorry to interrupt you. But before we move on, I really wanted to point it out. He said 1964, 1991 is when they started enforcing it. That's 27 years, guys. 1991 to right now, it's about 30 some years. But I want to make sure that we point that out because it's really important to understand that when it comes to equality, that's how slow it's going. It's snail paced. So I apologize, Mr. Mike. I'm going to let you continue, but I just wanted to point that out.
No, I mean that's a great point, because that's exactly what I was getting into with the entirety of this entire piece, is that not one, not two, but there's been like 11 or 12 of these civil rights acts since the ending of slavery, and since the ending of the Civil War. And this is coming from, like we've always said, a country that says that everyone's supposed to be treated equal, every man treated equal. But looking at this and seeing how slow things are going, and then, like I said, doing some of the reading in the Constitution, the way that they describe people of African descent are completely different. And when they were talking about those who aren't African Americans and who are white, they refer to them as people. So, just the little nuances like that is what's keeping us from getting to a point of being able to understand and talk and have this dialogue um, on that. So, Odie, that's the end of my history piece. If you have any questions or anything that you want to add in before I move on to the next point.
No, I mean, you covered it really well. I love the fact that we were able to talk about those the way that civil rights has grown in our country, and I just want you guys to remember that when it comes to our Constitution, when it comes to these civil rights acts that are being run, um, especially nowadays, it's funny to me how these politicians always refer to it as, oh, we can't change the Constitution. Our forefathers made this and they made it perfect. They want to glorify the Constitution as if it's perfect the way it was, but it was never meant to be perfect. It was always meant to be able to be changed. We've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. Had it been made perfect, then the our forefathers, the writers of it, would not have made it able to be amended. And the fact that we have to go through so much to get amendments that help citizens, help people, is completely ridiculous. I mean, you're listening to Mr. Mike go over each one of these things that are all supposed to better our lives, and we appreciate it. But the fact that they've had to go back and keep doing it is the point that we're trying to make.
Exactly. And going and continuing on that, I mean, it is. And that's the point that we've been trying to make week after week after week after week after week, is that no one's perfect. We understand that. But we will probably never get to perfect. But in order to start to understanding each other, we need to understand how all of these systems that are here now came into being. And with 8, 9, 10, 11 civil rights acts that have been passed down, since the ending of the Civil War. I mean, how many times do we have to come together to say, hey, this isn't right? Hey, we should probably do some understanding. Hey, why don't we try to, make things equal for everybody, while, you're sitting here complaining about this, that, and the third. We want to make sure that everyone gets their fair share and their fair dues as well. Um, so I mean, it's like we've been saying this entire time. It's just like we keep asking for the same thing and nobody's hearing us. And Odie said several times, the language of the unheard is riots. So until we're heard, and until we can have our voice, we're going to continue to speak out. We're going to continue to you know say this is wrong, and say, hey, this is what we want. So I mean, it's not something that's unheard of. It's just people asking for their basic rights as a people.
Yeah, and I mean, we go back to this. We've spoken about this before, but it's nothing miraculous. There's nothing spectacular that we're asking for. When the rioters on January 6th stormed the Capitol, they did that because, according to them, they weren't being heard. No one was listening to them. But we said it earlier when I can't remember what comedian it was said. Now they know how it feels like to be black. I think it was. I can't remember his name, but he says now I know what it feels like to be black, or now they know what it feels like to be black, and all they did was lose a election fairly. But it goes with a question that was asked last week on Twitter by Ms. Rosemary. Why is it that we're treated differently? Because they don't expect us to do it. We're always told, guys, y'all already had civil rights. That was in the 60s. Racism is dead. Since the 60s, racism doesn't exist. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. fixed it all for you guys. Why you crying? Just get over it. And the reality is, were that true, were that real, we wouldn't have needed any additional civil rights acts after that. The fact that we're still having to do civil rights, the fact that Florida just passed suppression laws as well, is should make it apparent to everybody that it's still not where it needs to be.
And the thing is, we're not even getting close. The gap is still so wide that it's just unheard of. And that goes, and Odie, you really actually brought up my next point, the misconceptions of the Civil Rights Act. You know what I mean? It's like you said, there was a Civil Rights Act, they had the March for the Civil Rights in the 1960s, and everybody got, the laws were passed to have these things, so you guys should be able to vote and have lunch with us at our counters, so that's all over, right? No, it's just because we're able to sit with in the same place doesn't mean that it's fair. Well, another one is slavery was bad, but we ended it. No, you didn't end it. It's still it just got a different name. It's called the prison system. You didn't really change anything. You're still, again, I'll get to that later. And then here's my favorite one, Odie. We had a black president, so the country can't be racist.
Oh, yeah. And I know exactly what you mean. I hear that all the time. Like, oh, well, we had a black president. I don't know if you guys have had conversations with people lately, and maybe it's because I'm not black that some people feel more comfortable saying these things in my presence. By the way, I don't let them get away with it. I always stand up for everybody. But have you heard some of the ways that they've referred to Obama? Have you heard some of the ways that they've referred to his wife, to our first lady? I mean, we had, who was it? Roseanne. Which one was the one that compared her to Planet of the Apes? And then coming out trying to justify it, saying that wasn't racist. You got to realize, guys, having one black president when there's 46 of them, and the one black president that we've had was being accosted the whole time by an orange immigrant that he wasn't born in the United States, accosted. Everybody says, and every Trump supporter says, oh my God, no president has ever been targeted like Trump was. Did you all forget that Obama was criticized for months because of the pattern of the curtains that were used while he was addressing the nation? Like, that to me made absolutely no sense, that he was being called, first of all, there's no problem with being Muslim, but that he was being called a Muslim just because of the patterns on his curtains. Look, the reality is that, has there been progress? Yes. We had a black president. We now have a multiracial vice president, but one is not the same, guys, especially when that one isn't being treated equally, especially when that one isn't being given the respect that others were. I mean, I don't want to sound offensive, but the reality is I've gone through quite a few presidents now. I was George Bush Sr., Clinton, George Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, and Biden. And out of all six, the most articulate has been Obama. The one that was able to express his thoughts and his direction to the country the best was Obama. The one that had a clear goal in sight and was able to articulate it was Obama. We can't forget that the reason none of his goals or a lot of his goals didn't get met was because of the opposition by the white senators and people making laws. There's one that looks like a frog that said when Obama became president that he was going to make sure none of Obama's goals were met. So how in the world can we say, well, you guys got a president, so racism doesn't exist?
And it's sad that that same senator that you were mentioning is still a senator today, and is still able to make laws and stuff like that. But whatever. Here's something that's been baffling me too. How is it that everything that the previous president wanted to do during the election, states are starting to make laws so that the next time he wants something like that done, it can be done? And he did all of that from Florida with no social media. That's worrisome. That, this man who fairly lost the election is still able to coerce, state officials, state governments to do his bidding.
It's funny because you mentioned this earlier when you were going over the Civil Rights Act. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I thought it was so funny because it was exactly what had been on my mind earlier this week. You talked about truth and how the truth is perception, and that's exactly what's going on right now. You see, we believe as people, and I'm going to get a little psychological here, so I apologize, but we believe that there's an absolute truth. We as people believe there has to be a truth. This is the one way. But the reality is that our truth is based on our perceptions. Our truth is based on the way we see the world. So all the people that have been following this person, the past president, they've allowed their perception to be skewed simply because it's what they want. And now they're using that fake truth, that perceived truth, to create a narrative that allows them to reach the goals that they wanted. And we have to be very careful with that. We have to make sure that those that know that isn't the truth do everything we can to stop the country from taking steps backwards. Just like they have their truths and this person is their savior, and forget everybody else, in other words, with another F word, we have to make sure that our truth, that our future is secured. We have all these beliefs that our country is the greatest, that our country is the best in everything, that our country has no faults. And I've said before, I want to make sure that I say I love my country. I can see myself as a citizen of any other country. Um, I adore my country, but because I love it so much is the reason why I want to fix it. I love my wife with all my heart. I'm not going to leave her the first problem we have in our marriage. You know, for all of those that say, well, why don't you just leave America? This America, if you don't like it, leave it. Um, that's not the way love works. When you love something, you can identify what's wrong with it and you can work on fixing it. You don't accept what's wrong with it and you don't leave it just because there's something wrong with it. Um, and the fact that this creature is convincing, not convincing, is giving these politicians the excuse to take our country back should be something that we are very focused on. We can't allow this to be Jim Crow 2.0. We can't allow them to blatantly steal our country. There was a senator that came out in Fox News and blatantly told them. They asked him, "Why are you supporting these laws?" And he literally said, "Like I could not believe my brain that someone would have the gall to say, well, we don't want to, we don't want to give the Democrats any chance to win. So I'm going to support it because it guarantees that we're going to win." So they know what they're doing is not right, but they're supporting it because they don't want us to have a voice.
And it's again stuff that we've been saying since week one. Um, this is proof positive of how strong our voices are when we come together, and this is what they're afraid of. So they're gonna do things. They're gonna put policies in place. They're gonna do whatever they have to do in order to keep those voices from being heard, or those keep those voices from actually being able to use them. Um, and going back to what you were saying earlier, Odie, talking about how we shouldn't be taking a step back. Um, I mean, I agree. We should definitely be able to look back on our country and say, this is what was, and this is what we did in order to bring it back together and truly stop it. Um, this is something that I found this week that was really disturbing, and how how several states want to remove certain curriculums out of the history course, and a lot of people are not happy about it because I'm sorry, not take things out, but add to the curriculum. They want to add to the curriculum um, the topic of um, the real topic of slavery, how it was actually, you know, a very vile and violent time in history of this country. They want to bring that. Then they want to talk. Then they want to include in the curriculum white supremacy and its influence over the country. And lo and behold, as soon as they came out with this, all of these white parents came out. They were like, "We're not racist. We shouldn't have this stuff. My kid shouldn't be exploited to these things. And just because I don't want them taught about it doesn't mean that I'm racist." So you want your kid to learn about history, but you don't want your kid to know about the real American history. So you're perfectly fine with the diluted, watered down history that we get in this country. And that says two things to me. That says that yes, people are okay with diluted history. And it also says to me that white supremacy wants to continue to suppress itself until they're able to do what they want to do again.
Um, I think it's funny that you mentioned that because I was reading up on that as well, and it I want to make sure I say this, guys. So uh, Give me 1 second, only because I don't know the exact definition, and I don't want anybody to come back and say, "Well, that's not the exact dictionary of it." I just want to read irony to you guys. The expression of one's meaning by using language that normally signifies the opposite, typically for humorous or emphatic effect. A state of affairs or an event that seems deliberately contrary to what one expects and is often amusing as a result. So I want now that you know the definition of irony, listen to this. These are the same people that want to keep the statues of slave owners, of Confederates that lost a war. And yet, when we're teaching them about what they were doing in the first place, they don't want it. Isn't that the textbook definition of irony? I mean, hey, you've been fighting for 4 years that you want the statues. So if you want to keep the statues, then shouldn't we at least know who the people on those statues are and what they did and what they stood for? Why are we trying to hide that?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself because it never made sense. They had, and do we not remember Charlottesville last year? Remember they wanted to take down the statue,
Yeah.
and premises came out, and they had their chants and all this other stuff, and the opposing side was like, "This is exactly why we want this removed. This is the history in which you guys are bringing out that we want to get rid of." But you guys on the opposite side are okay with leaving out slavery, white supremacy, all that other stuff. But we want to keep the statues of these people because they're such great people. What? So the people that enslaved the people that fought in a war to keep these people enslaved, are the people in this country who you want to admire, but you don't want to know the history behind the people that you're admiring? Makes no sense. Now, you ready for some real facts real quick? I'm going to give you some. Less than 10%, 10%, less than 10% of an entire school year, less than 10% talks about Black history. That's nationwide. Less than 10% of class time in this nation is spent talking about Black history.
And by the way, it's less for other races.
Absolutely.
So 90% is talked about our white races. Well, you know what? For the sake of argument, 85% of the time is spent talking about the white contribution to the country. 10%, less than 10% about the Black contribution to the country, and about 5% about the Asian, Hispanic, and all the other, Native American, and all the other races that don't matter. According to them, don't matter.
And here's the thing about it, and this is the part of history that makes me laugh all the time, because again, we got 2 weeks of Native American history from Odie. And like he always says, whenever you pick up a textbook, whenever you see a movie, whenever you hear about Native Americans and white settlers interacting, it's always the natives are attacking us. They're savages. We need to take care of this problem. We need to eradicate the problem. You were the problem. You invaded their land. You literally took over their territories that they were trying to be peaceful and share with you. And you just decided to take upon yourself to just, this is mine. I'm going to take over because I like this, and I like this. This is mine. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do in order to make this mine, up to and including these people. Oh, we got some of those smallpox blankets, right? Let's go and get them out. To deliberately give a transmittable disease to an entire people on purpose. And then you want to sit here and tell me what shouldn't be in history books and what should, that should definitely be in the history book.
By the way, with that said, I want to make sure that I point out, speaking about it in our history books isn't going to make white people evil, isn't going to make your white children grow up thinking that they're inferior. One of the things that I found that was so interesting about this topic, and that really points out the hypocrisy, is Germany. Germany teaches their classes, their students, their children about World War II, about the Nazi, about the Holocaust. And that doesn't make their children feel like they're Nazis. That doesn't make their children grow up to want to be little Hitlers. On the other hand, that's making them realize, hey, we can be better. We can do better. Um, uh, when you aren't sharing the history, you're not preventing your children from being slandered or from having a low self-esteem. You're preventing them from understanding how we can be better.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say the exact same thing about Germany, you know, and like you said, like little kids aren't coming home to mommy and daddy like, oh my gosh, mommy, they're saying this about my people and I'm not Hitler. No, it's not how it is. It's they're understanding that this is history. This is what was done. And this is what we have to make sure that we indoctrinate into our children what happened, so that we can understand not only what's going on today, how we can make impacts for today and tomorrow.
I mean, think about it this way, guys. When we're talking about history, when we talk about contributions made by Black Americans, who are the only two, three people that you know? You'll probably only know Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and George Washington Carver. Those are usually the three that are mentioned. And most of George Washington Carver's contributions weren't even his contributions. There's so much misinformation there too. Dr. Martin Luther King was an excellent man, but he was one piece in the big cog, in the big gears that led to all these contributions. I mean, like, the fact that the first I don't remember if it was the first heart surgery or the first heart transplant. I can't remember which one, but it was a Black American that did that. The traffic light, Black American that did that. So all of these wonderful inventions, all of this beautiful history that no one is told. So we're led to believe no one has ever contributed to this country except for whites.
Absolutely. And if you pick up a textbook, that's all you'll see. Um, you know, they will go chapter after chapter about how this was done by this white man, this was done by this white man, and these are the men that built America. Meanwhile, millions of enslaved people, hundreds of thousands of natives, and other indentured servants who came to this country in order for an opportunity are what built America. These people that built America gave these men the opportunity to be successful based off of the color of their skin, off of the blood, sweat, tears, and everything else of those who came before them and essentially, built this country. Um, so another fun fact, 8% of high school seniors can tell you the central cause of the Civil War. The remaining 92% believe, they still believe that the North and the South got into a big conflict just about slavery. And I've said time and time and time and time again that the Civil War, they didn't care Abraham Lincoln said it in a speech. If I could save the Union without releasing one slave, I would do it. If I can preserve the Union and free all slaves, I would do it. While he owned slaves. You know what I mean? So everyone gives Abraham Lincoln all this credit for, oh, he did the right thing by releasing slaves. The truth is, Abraham Lincoln only wanted to abolish slavery so he could have help in a war that he was losing. Because he knew that millions of people in the South would fight for their freedom, literally, given the opportunity. And this was their opportunity.
And by the way, it's not by mistake that they don't know the whole story. It's by design. I remember, uh, one of the teachers, and I feel so bad for him now because I gave him such headaches when I was in 8th grade. Mr. Sanchez, if you ever watch this, I hope you understand that I learned my lesson. And the thing was that when we were being taught U.S. history in 8th grade, or it was sugar coated. We really just thought that, oh my goodness, the Civil War was for slavery, and it never made sense to me. It never made sense that why would a brother versus brother be just about slavery? I mean, was it really that divisive of an issue? If my brother owned slaves, the probability is I own slaves too. It couldn't have just been one about that issue, but that's all we're told. And we're told, the hero of the story was Abraham Lincoln, and he did all this for the African Americans, and that's it. We've One of the reasons we wanted to give you guys history every single week is to show you guys how skewed history is, how one-sided it is. I mean, uh, you know, it wasn't until after middle school, it wasn't until high school that I started doing the research on my own, and I started seeing all of these discrepancies with what we were being told, all these lies that we were being fed, and they are lies. They're lies by omission. If they don't tell us what's going on, how are they telling us the truth? Um, so um yes, it's 92% of our children don't know what the real point of the Civil War was, because the government doesn't want us to know, because the education system doesn't want us to know.
Which is funny because all the starting of the Civil War is basically the same thing that clearly happened in this previous election. It all started with the election of Abraham Lincoln. And Southern states did not want to certify, did not agree with the pick of the people. I'm sure this sounds real familiar. So what happened? They got into their little crazy little huddle and was like, look, this Abraham dude is going to free all of our slaves. He's going to make us do this. He's going to take our meat away. We're only going to have meat on Mondays. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So what happened was South Carolina decided was the first state to secede from the Union. And the rest of the states followed soon after. They wanted to overthrow the federal government to impose their will. Doesn't that sound like January 6th? So this is why history is important. These people were in the Capitol screaming 1776. That's the same year in which you took over a country who let me say this again. This is the year that you gained independence from a country in a country that you stole. I don't get it. And then in the 1860s, you decide we don't like what the forefathers put in place. We don't agree with it. We don't agree with the design. So what we're going to do is we're going to overthrow that government by creating our own government, and we're going to stand against that government. And then after this conflict's over, the same policy and lawmakers were able to keep the same jobs. And then we wonder why we are where we are today. None of those people were held accountable. Doesn't that sound familiar? Who's held accountable today?
Look, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I was looking at this week um, made me really think it. It made me realize uh, it made me realize how backwards our country is sometimes. I want you guys to remember what happened in the 1940s during World War II. What did we do to our Japanese Americans? We put them in concentration camps because we were afraid they were spies. What about the German Americans? Did they get put in concentration camps? Not only did they not get put in concentration camps, but what happened after the war was over? We took in how many German scientists, how many German, these were the people that were fighting against us. And they took them in and they made them citizens and they gave them more rights than the black people that fought the war with them. They gave them more rights than the Native Americans that helped them win the war with the Apache codes and all that. They gave them more rights than all the people that fought with them. They took the people that fought against them, brought them over to the country and said, hey, you're white. How about you join us? Yay, more white people. And, oh, yeah, Tuskegee Airmen, yeah, y'all can go back to going to the back of the restaurant and picking up your doggy bag there. It's kind of really backwards for our country, isn't it?
And then again, like we keep saying, this is just period after period of time in which we're seeing the same things repetitively happening over and over and over and over and over again. And it's never ending. 8 out of 50 states in this country don't even teach about slavery. 8 out of 50 states don't even teach it. Only 2 states in the entire United States teach about white supremacy. Only 2.
I mean, we're from Texas, so I gotta just to make sure that we keep it transparent. Growing up, a couple of my teachers talked about white supremacy because Texas has a lot of KKK. And I always mispronounce it. I think it's Viter or Viter, Texas. Is it Viter? The one that up to the 60s had a billboard as you were going into the city that said the N-word, Mexicans, Jews, and so on and so on. You better not let the sun set on you, Inviter. Yeah, guys, that billboard was up to the 60s. I just want to throw that out there. For those of you that might not be from Texas that are watching this, that existed. You can look it up. You can still see that billboard. Guys, we learned a little bit of white supremacy because of that. We learned a little bit about the KKK, but again, it's presented as a thing of the past, and it isn't, because I can tell you right now. I stopped Inviter once. Never again will I do it. The last time that we passed by Viter, my wife needed to go to the restroom. We stopped at a rest stop, and I said, "Sweetheart, I'm staying in the truck. If you come out and the truck isn't here, it's because they scared me away, and I'll drive back as soon as I can to pick you up." um, we shouldn't live like that. We shouldn't live like that. Um, and for those of you that have never had to go through that, great, but understand it's there. Just because we're not teaching it in schools, just because only 2 states teach that it even existed, doesn't mean it's gone.
Absolutely. And, again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but this is stuff that we talk about week after week. This is week 10, and we're talking about the same thing. We're able to literally pick out pieces of history in which this stuff happened before, and we're able to regurgitate it and show you how it's happening today. Um, Again, this is why we preach the history portion each week. That's why we try to include as much knowledge in the history portion each week, is because if we can understand, like I said before, we can understand where we came from, how these policies came into place, we can know how to redact it, we know how to go back and fix it. Um, and I know we've talked a lot about that tonight, but I want to go on to talking about the shooting that happened not too long ago. So police officers, I think it was Fort Worth. I'm not sure. I have to relook it up. They pull up in a pickup truck. Literally have SWAT officers in the back of a pickup truck to go and serve a drug warrant to a man, African American man, of course. And as soon as they pull up into his yard, as he starts to drive away, nowhere near the cops, by the way, they just open fire, shooting him in the back of the head. So this means he was fleeing away from them. Um, I don't know how many of you know what the fleeing felon law is, but it's a law that says if any person is fleeing from you, you cannot shoot them. So if someone breaks into my house, steals my TV, and they're running away, I cannot shoot them in the back for my TV or any of my property. Only if there was an inherent danger to another person. Life is the only reason that you can shoot someone in the back. I'd preserve another life. These officers were not preserving anyone's life, not even their own. He was not inherently harming anyone else in trying to flee. So, what do you think the odds are, Odie, that accountability is going to get taken into this? And what do you think, and as far as the fleeing felon law, what do you think about it, and how do you think we should move forward from this?
Um, man, you see, and for those of you that, because there's always going to be someone that tries to make an excuse. Well, why was he running? Well, why did he have to run? Uh, uh, because he's afraid. I'm just gonna start off by saying that because that's the point of what Mike is saying. We know, some people know that this law exists, where if you're fleeing, you should not be killed, and there's sometimes more safety in trying to run than there is in staying. And for these police officers to willy-nilly just draw their guns and shoot like that. Like Mike said, there was no inherent danger. Their guns are not there because they're hunting deer. Their guns are there to protect them if there is danger. Um, and um, is there going to be um, is is anyone going to take a fall for this one? Honestly, um, I hope so, man. I don't know. This one I don't know because it's Texas, and Texas sometimes surprises me. Austin's been surprising me lately, but this is Fort Worth. This is right in the heart of Texas. Wait, was it Fort Worth? I think so, right?
Look real quick.
I think I think it was
Oh,
well,
it was sorry, it was in North Carolina.
oh, it was in North Carolina. Huh, I don't know why I thought it was Texas. My bad. I must have been looking at another one. I apologize. But should somebody uh be charged with it? Yeah, because there's that the law exists. I mean, think of it this way, guys. Uh, if this person doesn't get charged, if this police officer does not get charged with manslaughter for shooting a man in the back, then I mean, that means that technically every person that's in jail for killing somebody by shooting them in the back, their lawyers can now go back and argue that there's new precedents. There's new information. There's a new case that a person has not been charged, has not gotten convicted because of it, and that could be an argument that could lead to a murderer actually walking free. So
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say. So do we feel that it's worth letting a police officer get away with it, letting someone that actually may have committed a murder with malice have the ability to argue their way out of it?
Correct. And here's also the second part of that story. Um, as usual, whenever um they murder someone of color, whenever they do harm to someone of color, there's always a narrative behind it. There's always a, well, before he was, they were like I said, they were serving this man with a drug warrant. They were coming to search. Um, Incredibly, they found no drugs, they found no money, they found no weapons. So here's the part that absolutely irritates me on this is because you got caught doing something wrong. You want to try to drag his name through the mud in order to give you justification as to why you and just decided to take his life. It had nothing to do with his past or anything like that. It's your decision that caused this man to lose his life. And it's always the narrative, like with George Floyd. The whole trial, all you heard was, "Oh, he was on drugs. He did drugs. He previously did drugs. He was drugs, this drugs. He had a bad heart, and oh, the heart." That had nothing to do with a grown man and two other grown men laying on this man's neck and shoulders and back for 10 minutes. That is what killed him. The fact that these officers came in tactical gear and assault rifles, and this man feared for his life and decided to get the hell out of Dodge and was still shot. That's not justification. This man's past is what his crime was, didn't deserve a death sentence. Again, why do we say, you know, these instances and use them as a reason to use deadly force? You're serving a warrant. The man ran. That's not a death sentence. Running from the police is not a death sentence. You've had too many people within the last year get shot in the back by police, and they're all African Americans. One was shot in the back 7 times trying to get into his car with his children. Like it's not a death sentence. walking away from the police, running away from the police is not a death sentence. Shouldn't be anyway, but it is, and it's happening way too often.
And that's actually what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, guys. The systematic racism. Um, you know, we keep saying this, and I keep saying this. Mike keeps saying this. We don't blame. We really do not think every white person in this country is racist. But if the system itself is racist, then it not every white person in the country needs to be racist for race to be an issue. We go back to the term white privilege, and I was reading an article earlier this week by a person named let me get her name because I really want to make sure. I love the article and I just want to make sure I mention her name. Susan Parker. I was reading an article by Susan Parker. She wrote it in 2020, and I loved it. She talks about. I'm going to read an excerpt out of it, and then I'm going to tell you what about it I loved that connects to what Mr. Mike is talking about. She starts off by saying, first of all, white privilege. If you don't think you have it, I believe you are mistaken. You might be thinking, well, I didn't grow up privileged. So I grew up scraping to get through college, working two jobs. You may say, I think everyone who works hard can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But if you think that, it's probably because you've never considered that many people can't afford boots. I love that she started it like that. And now, by the way, she's a white lady from Alabama, and she talks about how she started believing, she started seeing white privilege and this systematic racism. And she talks about being at a university. She was working at this university with Dr. Rice. Dr. Rice is an African American minister who also teaches at this university. And she says, the moment I realized that racism was systematic, and even if it wasn't in my heart, it was part of me, is that one evening she was working with Dr. Rice, and they say their goodbyes. They're walking away, and as she's opening her car, she sees a black man wearing a hoodie, drops her keys, starts shaking until she realizes the black man walking towards her was Dr. Rice.
Wow.
She says, when I realized it was Dr. Rice, it made me understand that just because of how he was dressed and because of the color of his skin, I'm already assuming the worst. That is systematic racism, guys. When you are taught, when you are told, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago that we were visiting Houston, and family that is white. We passed by the third ward, which is mainly Hispanic, mainly lower income, and they lock the windows. And to me, it was like, why are we locking the windows? Like, what's going on? And I'm being told, oh, this is the bad part of town. Like, you don't want to have your windows unlocked here. And my mind is, ooh, this is probably where the best food's at. Let's find a place to eat. It's because we've been brought up with this different mentality. And when it's ingrained in who we are, because that's what society tells us, where else can we go? We keep talking about the officers, and Miss Parker is viewing the Dr. Rice the same way that the officers are viewing this person as a hardened criminal. Again, it's funny to me. A lot of states no longer believe in capital punishment If you look back and check on why they don't believe in capital punishment, it wasn't because a black man got put to death. Most of the states that abolished capital punishment, they started fighting against it when white men started getting put to death. And that's when they started saying, "Oh my God, it's inhumane." And now we have a state that just that is lobbying. Guys, this is how backwards our country is getting. This is how many steps back we're taking. There's a state that's lobbying to bring back the firing squad. That is insane. They already have a firing squad. They don't need another one. If you're black in America, every police officer apparently is a firing squad. Why do you have to bring that one back too?
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. But going back to your excerpt about white privilege, um, I actually had some time this week, um, and I basically just wrote down some thoughts that I had based on some of the knowledge that I have over the history of this country. So I'm going to read a little. I'm going to read that off real quick. So, white privilege has been a segue into the systematic policies we have today. Since the beginning of this nation, whites have done anything and everything to establish their supremacy over any race, culture, species, or anything in their way to inherit a paradise not meant for them while doing so in the name of religion. How many other ethnic groups do you know that have massacred a few cultures and enslaved the people, then have refused to talk about it in history while praising and teaching about the men who not only participated but encouraged it, but it also encouraged the institution of slavery, the massacring of Native Americans and Mexicans to expand deeper into the West. There were, or should I say, are policies that are written in order to be able to claim or legitimize the wrongdoings. But at the same time, they protect them once the one done wrong tries to bring it up into the courts. For example, the number of minority voters were in a record number to remove the previous president, and what happened? States all over the country have placed new laws in order to restrict the amount of voters can turn out in the following elections, just like Odie said earlier. Now, for those who say that that's in the past, let it go already. That is just one example of how these white supremacy policies were enacted during your lifetime. This is why history is important, so you can see from past experiences what white supremacy has done and will continue to do. And the reason they want us to forget history is so that they can keep you blinded and not let you know how us coming together will be the only way to stop their agendas. Now does it make sense why most states don't even want to discuss slavery, civil rights, or even the mention of white supremacy in their curriculum? Slaves were bound and chained and marched hundreds of miles from their tribes to ships that took them to a new world where they were forced to work for hours, day in and day out. And the only thing that they owned was nothing. Their name was taken. They were given new ones because slavers couldn't pronounce their native names. Their culture was stripped and was forbidden to learn about. The religion was forced upon them, and their reality was altered in all hopes that they could dilute their history of their tribe. And why? Why did they do this? That's easy. To be seen as a supreme beings looking down on an entire people while mutilating and dismembering them as a pastime, lynching them as a spectacle to enjoy, raping them was their entertainment, and killing them was the only issue because they were a piece of property that they spent their hard-earned money to buy, not a person, property. Even after the Constitution sold us the false dream that slavery was abolished, we face the same dangers. After 400 years, freedom didn't come in any form that many Blacks had hoped. Many ended up in the prison system, for example, for simple and minor infractions. The 13th Amendment was purposely written to basically make slavery, just with the way to validate it in courts. The numbers today show the same staggering rates in which Blacks and minorities are sold into modern day slavery. Prisons donate to prosecutors and judges, who are elected, by the way, in order to keep their population of inmates at staggering high capacity, so that the funding can continue to flow in as they use the servitude of their inmates while they live in the worst conditions imaginable. Most times, they're unhygienic. White supremacy has a long history in policing. In fact, the first law enforcement in America was solely tasked with tracking runaways and patrolling the roadways, ensuring slaves had documentation or permission to be walking off their master's land. And if they didn't produce such papers, and sometimes even if they did, the patrolman had just cause to do whatever to bring said property back to his master, up to and including him for a bounty. Does this sound familiar? Maybe it's because we hear too often how Blacks are stopped, unlawfully detained, searched, and most of the times murdered. White supremacy has dug itself so deep into how law impacts Blacks and how law enforcement treats Blacks in their interactions. All too often, we have seen and heard how Blacks are stopped for minor traffic offenses and are suddenly pulled out of their cars or shot. Sandra Bland, failure to signal, not a reason to be pulled out from her car, but she was pulled from her car and arrested. For what? She wouldn't obey the slave patrolman's orders. Like I said before, if you don't go along or listen or jump when he says jump, you're a threat to his white supremacy. And he will do whatever he has to do to make you submit to it, or he will kill you and claim he felt endangered. For the longest time, I never understood how so many cops got away with the narrative, I was in fear. But now it makes sense. The fear isn't for their life, it's for their livelihood of white supremacy.
I mean, what can you say? That says it all, man. And I just want to make sure that we point out for all of those that have told us in the past it doesn't exist anymore. The reason we're doing this is because we want to make sure that that you understand the reality that some people are living in. Uh, when you're viewed as less than human, when you're viewed as less intelligent, less anything, just because of the color of your skin, how could you ever, 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 ever hope to be something, be someone? Mr. Mike goes through this, and I apologize if I missed it, Mike. Did you say who the author of that was?
Me.
You wrote that?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know you had written that. Man, that makes it even more beautiful to me because did you hear how eloquent that was, guys? I want to make sure that I point out that is the feeling. That is what's going through our brains. That is the reality that we have to live in. And we don't blame. We've said this before, and I'll say it a million times more. We don't blame anyone for it. But just because it's not your fault doesn't mean you're not complicit. We talk about our experiences. I know we already gave a history lesson, and this one it doesn't go too fast, too back. But just to give you an example of again how white supremacy and white the white systematic benefits affect us. There was something that I saw, and I wanted to talk about it. I'm trying to find her name. Give me 1 second. I know I'll find her name right here. But she is Give me one quick second here. Uh, well, while I'm looking for her, let's talk about Oprah for a second, because this one actually blew my mind. I didn't know this. Oprah talks about how her fourth grade teacher, who was white, told her, "You are never going to amount to anything. You will never be anything." She talks about how it was this white teacher telling her that actually propelled her, that actually pushed her to be the success she was, just to prove her wrong. If y'all remember last week, I was talking about how something similar happened to me, where a teacher told me, "Oh, you're not going to be a doctor. Nah, nah, nah. You're not going to be a doctor. Get that out of your head. That's not you." Here goes. Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman. Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman talked about her experience. She is a black woman, and she talks about when she earned her bachelor's degree in finance. She walked into a job interview, and the interviewer was an older white man, and that as soon as he saw her, he literally said verbatim, "Why did you waste my time in applying for this job? You will never be anything but a secretary." And walked out the door. Mr. Mike is reading this excerpt that was so eloquently written by him, talking about the systematic racism, talking about how we have a problem, a severe problem. We have Oprah Winfrey, one of the richest women in the world, that had to go through it. We have a Secretary of Labor that had to go through it. How can we say it doesn't exist? How can we say that everything's okay? I think we've been saying this for a few weeks, but it's really getting to that point where we need to admit to ourselves there is an issue. We've been talking about white privilege, and I did want to I did want to say this. Before I move on, Mike, your is there anything else that you want to say about your piece there? I mean, um, any dissection that you want to give?
Oh, absolutely not. No, you can go ahead, but
Awesome. I think this is a great segue. Mr. Mike is talking about Mr. Mike's piece laid out white supremacy in a very eloquent way, and I think that the best thing that we can do right now is talk to the white people that want to understand us a little bit more. And one of the things that I find funny, that I really think is uh, awe-inspiring, is how when you say white privilege, a lot of white people take that really, really personal. They don't like those words. Number one, it's funny because that's the only time you're actually addressed by your color. You know, you always refer to us as blacks, browns, reds. White privilege is one of the only times we call you white. But apart from that, I understand. The problem that you have with that is the word privilege. It makes it sound like you didn't earn it. And we're not talking about your merit. We're not talking about your struggles. We understand that everyone has struggles, and everyone has merit, and everyone pushes forward as much as they can. But let's go ahead and talk about what white privilege isn't. White privilege is not It's not the suggestion that white people have never struggled. We are not suggesting that you haven't gone through hardship. We are not suggesting that you have it made 100%. Especially because a lot of poor white people that were born poor have the same struggles. And white privilege is not the assumption. We are not assuming that everything you have not earned. We understand that if you own, that you earned where you're at. What white privilege is a head start. White privilege is a head start that allows you to get to those levels quicker and faster. When our children are being put to death just because of their past, just because of their past, how do you want us to not believe there's a built-in head start on there? I mean, let's go back and look at this kid. Mike, you're probably going to remember his name. I don't remember this kid's name, but he traveled across state lines with his AR-15, walking in the middle of a riot, and kills people. And we're justifying it, and we're getting him exonerated, and he does not have to take responsibility for his actions. And then we turn around and we talk about George Floyd. We talk about so many people recently that have all lost their lives without having a gun. Well, the 14, 13-year-old that had his gun, he threw it away. But, all these people are getting killed senselessly for no reason other than the color of their skin, other than their position on earth. Why should we feel inferior because we had the misfortune of being born the wrong color?
Yes, and his name was Kyle Rittenhouse. We'll get on him another day. And Odie's right. He hit it right on the head. 13-year-old kid threw his gun, still shot. This kid shoots two people, walks down the middle of the road with an AR-15 across his chest, and gets literally escorted out of the mob, out of the scene, and told to go home. Meanwhile, people are screaming, "He just shot two people. He just shot two people. He just shot people," and he was allowed to go home.
There's another little excerpt. Actually, this is not from Susan Parker. For those of you that didn't know, the term white privilege was coined by Dr. Peggy McIntosh in 1988. She wrote an essay called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And in there, she talks about white privilege. She actually mentions 50 privileges, 50 ways that she has benefited from being white. And one of the excerpts from her essay that I loved is when she said, I can swear in public or dress in secondhand clothes, or not answer my letters without having people assume that because of my immorality, because of the immorality of my kind, or the poverty of my kind, or the literacy of my kind, I am where I'm at. One of the reasons that I try as hard as I can to not curse is because the moment I do it, I'm being put into a little bubble that says, he's a Cholo Mexican that loves to curse. One of the reasons that I try really hard to be as articulate and read as much as I can is because I don't want to be told, oh, well, He doesn't like to read because he's Mexican. They don't read. It shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't be placed in these cubes that either kill us or make us inferior simply because of who we are, guys. I don't know if you have anything else to say, but one other thing I want to just food for thought, guys. This is something that I really think will make everybody hopefully see the big picture, and that it's just a little question: who created races to begin with? The truth is, if you look at Central America, it's funny because I identify as Chicano sometimes, Hispanic Chicano. And I'm being told by, of course, of all people, a white person, Chicano's not a race. Chicano's an ethnicity. Your race is Hispanic, or I identify as Latin sometimes. You're not Latin. You don't come from Central America. You come from Mexico. That's a Hispanic because you speak Spanish country. Uh, who's giving me these labels? The white people. We didn't create those labels for ourselves. When we were Native Americans living in our tribes, we were all still people. That's why we opened up the country with open arms to the white man. That's why we talked about in past weeks African Americans that were freed were allowed to join tribes to get all the benefits of Native Americans because Native Americans never saw race. We saw people. Central Americans never saw race. We saw people. Africans never saw race. They saw tribes and people. The only ones that are so worried about putting us in these labels are also the ones that are worried about keeping our voices shut.
And again, I'll say, like I've been saying, how, in order to suppress people, you want them to not know their history. If you deny history, you can deny a future. Um, and with that being said, I mean, we have to really, like Odie said, question ourselves. Where did this all start? It didn't start with Africans coming over to America, starting a war and losing and becoming slaves. No, it started with whites going into Africa, killing off a bunch of people, or having other tribes fight against each other, taking them their prisoners and making them slaves. And then after these people were enslaved for 400 years, they systematically kept putting these people down, making laws to make it where they will always stay beneath them. Like Odie said, there was um the head start. They're born with a head start. And like I said previously, it's the gap is so wide. It's you know, like I said a couple episodes ago, we're grinding from the bottom just to make it to the bottom. We're not even close to closing that gap, no matter how hard we try. When you, like Odie said before, when you have these systematic policies that keep us from getting loans for homes and for businesses, so that way we can bring ourselves out of the poverty, so that way we can bring ourselves up from the bottom. Um, you got these policies enacted where it's impossible to do so. Um, so again, there's a lot of work to do in this country, and I'm going to throw another question that Odie gave us a few weeks ago. When was America great? When was it ever? Um, And, I can't think of a time in which this country was great, because there's always some sort of inequality towards people of color. Um, and like what he said, you have to give, um, the fair credit to be transparent. Poor whites, they go through the same thing. It's a system that's basically designed to disparage poor people and those who are, um, or people of color. Um, so there's a lot of change that needs to be had in this country. There's a lot of turnaround that needs to be had in this country. There's a lot that we can do with our voices, and the fact that they're trying to suppress our voices by, making these voting laws is proof positive of how strong our voice is. So continue to use your voice, continue to speak out, continue to, protest and demonstrate. Um, Last week's episode, I listed ways to get in contact with your senators and congressmen. Continue to do that. Continue to, let them know that there are changes that need to be made, and it's their job to hear what we have to say, and in order to make these changes, because that's what we elect them for. And my last thing is, Texas is about to have um, their election, their midterm election here soon. No, I'm sorry, their early election here soon. Please, please, please get out and vote. We need every person to vote. The only way these policies are going to get changed is if we continue to use our voices. And we've proved it several times that once we band together, we can make change.
Definitely, guys. Definitely go out and vote. Prove to them that even though they're using the laws they created to try to shut us up, we will not allow it to happen. Prove to them, because if we show in Texas that our voice is stronger, it will give it will give our brethren, our people in Georgia, in Florida, that strength that is needed to show that we stand in solidarity. Remember, we don't want to stand behind you. We don't want to stand in front of you. We want to stand next to you. And the only way we can do that is by using our voices together. I'm gonna coin a term here. If it goes big, you're gonna owe me a dinner sometime, Mike. But I'm gonna term a coin here. If y'all have heard it before, I never have. So tell me who said it first, because that'd be cool to know too. But we've heard of mansplaining. White people out there that are hearing this, stop trying to white splain things to us. Stop trying to white splain things and listen to us. Hear us out. We know we love you. We know you're not the racist. We know you've never done it intentionally. But what you need to do is stop trying to white splain why we need to shut up, and start trying to hear us say why we need our voices so much.
Absolutely. And just like we want to hold police officers accountable, we should hold each other accountable. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, wrong is wrong. Call it out. We have the power of social media these days, and the reaction to these things are getting exponentially hilarious and quick responses. I am one to, and like we said before, Odie is more like the Martin Luther King, and I'm more of the Malcolm X. I enjoy seeing the videos of people demonstrating outside of businesses or homes of people who try to intimidate people or try to use their privileges or to just, I enjoy those videos. I mean, I think it's a good way for to show that the community is coming together. It shows that people are paying attention to the wrongs that are being committed in this country, and that there are people committed who want to make change, who want to see change in this country. And as long as we continue to do it like this peacefully, I mean, there's not a whole lot that they can really say. So continue to use your voices, continue to stand together as a community, and we will continue to make changes. Odie, you got anything else tonight before we out of here?
Yeah, one really last thing, Mike. The statement you read, what were you gonna do with it?
The one that I wrote myself. Um, I mean, I was thinking about putting it in the comment section, so those that didn't quite hear me, or if it potentially froze at any point, they can read it.
Yes, and he read my mind, guys. That's what I was gonna say. Put it in the comment section. Share, if you can, Mike, share it on your Facebook. Guys, share that out. Share that out. That needs to get out there. Everybody that reads it, everybody that I want you guys to take your time. Someone very near and dear to me once told me, reading something and hearing it are two very different things. When you hear someone say something, it's going in one ear and it's going out the other. When you read something, it's going through your eyes and directly to your brain. So read it. Read it once, read it twice, read it thrice. If you don't understand something in there, if you want Mr. Mike to elaborate on it, reach out to us. Reach out to us on Twitter. Reach out to us on comments on the video. Reach out to us because I really believe. I mean, I loved it, and I really believe that it needs to get shared. Share it with whoever needs to have it. Print it and give it to somebody if they don't want to go online and watch the video. It's okay. When we spread the message every way we can, it allows more seeds to be planted. We want to be the Johnny Appleseeds of this movement.
Absolutely. Yes, I will post it down into the comment section. Also on my Twitter and Facebook, and the Twitter of the Understanding Room. I don't know if there's enough characters for it. If there's enough characters, if I can fit it in there, I'll put it in there. But again, thank you to all of those that continue to support and watch and tune in and spread our knowledge and spread what we're trying to do out to everyone that's out there. Again, I want to say another thank you to Odie for helping me with this project. Hopefully we can continue to make a difference. Like Odie said in the first episode, we're not out here to try to gain anything from this. We're not trying to gain any popularity. We want to help other people know that they're not alone in wanting us to all come together and make a difference together. No matter what side you are on, we can come together and have a conversation. We should be able to have conversations without anything else. It's just a conversation. We should be able to have policies in place that protect everyone despite their skin color. We should be able to have policies in place to where our education is even across the board. Everybody understands the same things, because when we get older, we don't stay, a majority of us don't stay where we grew up at. We venture out, we go to different places, we go to new places, and we see new people, and our experiences are going to intermingle and our knowledge is going to intermingle. So eventually the topic of racism, the topic of systemic racism, the topic white supremacy is going to come to your door one day, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in the future. You're gonna have the conversation. We have to, as a nation, like Odie said before. Germany, they teach their history and their curriculum, including the World War II, including World War I, including the Holocaust. You know, they teach all of these things, and that's what we need to do in this country. We need to have that that knowledge, that fact of history, that this country isn't perfect. We didn't come perfect, you know, and it's not perfect today, but we're not going for perfect. We're going for a country that wants to understand each other while everybody gets treated the same. Everybody gets treated the way that they're supposed to be as a human being. And that one day we can all hopefully come together despite our views, despite our political differences, and understand that at the end of the day, for every day that we're bickering on something as stupid as voting laws and all this other things, people are dying. People are dying of COVID. People are dying of mass shootings. People are dying from homelessness. And mental health has been one of the things that has been really taking a back seat, and it's something that should definitely get a lot more light. As a person who suffers from mental illness myself, I completely understand. I know what it's like to want help and have the help not be available, or there be a delay or anything like that. So I just want to say that we should definitely try to, while we're in our pursuit of equality and social economic justice for everyone, we should definitely include mental health, because I believe that mental health can clear up a lot of the issues in this country. And I know she's probably not going to ever see this, but to the social worker that I spoke to this morning, Christina, thank you so much for everything that you've done, and that all that you do to help people. Lastly, I would just want to give another thank you to everyone in my family who supports this project. I love and I thank all of you, and continue for your continued support. So, well, I really hope that this evening we all had an opportunity to learn something new, or at least get our mind racing as to where we want to look into and start doing our own research. So if there's nothing else, until next time, continue to be good, be kind to each other, love each other, make good choices, and stay away from the Rona.